For the vendor side, I'm gonna cover 4 techniques, okay? And these 4 techniques are not really meant to be used in combination. They're actually meant to be used one of these 4. So if you are dealing with prepayments to vendors for your own practice or your own company, and or you're consulting with your client about how to handle these, I wouldn't recommend that you teach all 4 of these or you implement all 4 of these. I would say pick one of them and you make use of it. Now, the reason why I'm showing you 4, although you only need 1, is because when you walk into a client's QuickBooks files, you realize clients are very creative to make things work, and some of them that kind of understand accounting end up doing these things inadvertently without really knowing what they're doing, and they end up doing it. So I think it's important to keep in mind that you may walk into something like this, and if you know how the mechanics work, you may be able to troubleshoot it or understand it. Okay, so I'm going to jump into QuickBooks now, and I'm going to talk about handling prepayments to vendors. So the first scenario I'll discuss is under what circumstances we will do vendor prepayment. Okay, so circumstance, let me go into the vendor center. So circumstance number 1 is maybe we ordering some inventory, and they're asking us to pay upfront. Okay, that's the most common scenario here. So I'm going to create I'm just going to do a prepayment and then create a bill later. So I'm going to use the first technique, which is vendor A, and I just want to show you here that there's no bills created for this vendor. So I'm going to go ahead and just go to write check, and I'm going to create a payment to this vendor for $10,000. So let's say $15,000. Okay, so what I need to do is in order for me to apply this to a future accounts payable, so this is something that's going to go into an account that allows me to apply it to a bill later on, I have to use the accounts payable account. But here's the kicker. I'm using the accounts payable account, and this very sort of nonsensical way, I have to come here where it says customer job, and I have to put the vendor's name, right, which is kind of counterintuitive because you would expect to put a customer's name there. But the only way QuickBooks allows me to write a check to a vendor and use the accounts payable account is actually to put the vendor's name here, right? And then on the memo, I'll typically like to do something like prepaying bill number 123 coming in March, or something like that. So I would put a comment in the memo side. I would put something like this to just kind of give me an idea. Now I can make the prepayment a wire transfer, and then if it's a wire transfer, I'll just type wire up here. Okay, if it's an actual check number, I'll put the check number, whatever it is, right? So let's say I'm prepaying with a wire transfer, so I'm going to put here a wire, and then I'm going to hit save and close. Now the effect that writing a check to a vendor using the accounts payable account that it has is that it's going to create a negative accounts payable. So when I go into my balance sheet and I take a look at my accounts payable, this is now a negative number. So that being said, right, accounts payable being a negative number, in this case is not a problem. A negative liability, it's actually an asset. Okay, and then we're going to talk about putting it into some sort of prepaid vendor account or something like that. Also, to remove some of the confusion, I'm going to delete some of these other transactions I have here that don't need to be here. So I'm going to get rid of them. That way in our balance sheet, we're strictly just looking at that particular item. So this is what I wanted to do. Just wanted to take a look at this one accounts payable for $15,000. So then when it comes to creating the actual bill, whatever the bill may be, so I'm going to go ahead and create a bill now. And I'll create a bill. Let's say this bill is for $30,000. So I'll put here $30,000, and this happens to be $30,000 worth of inventory or whatever it is. For the time being, what I'll do is I'll just create an account here called inventory, and this is not correct, though. I actually have to use the items, but just for the heck of it, I'm using this account here just to kind of illustrate the $30,000. So I'm going to put $30,000 up here, $30,000 up there. That's the actual bill amount. That's how much money I owe to my vendor ultimately. However, I only pay them $15,000 the second time around because that would be the other half. So I'm going to hit save and close. And then what will happen is when I go back into my vendor, now it's showing positive $15,000, which is the correct accounts payable. However, when I go into a report, and I'm going to go, for example, into a report and look at my unpaid bills report, the entire bill shows as unpaid for $30,000. I'll make this font a little bit bigger here. the entire bill shows for 30,000, but there's also sort of an outstanding check for 15. So my total vendor balance is showing correct. Unfortunately, my entire bill is showing open. So the way to fix that is I'm going to go into vendors, pay bills, and then in my pay bills window, it shows my one bill for 30,000. But when I select it, I'm going to see the system's going to prompt me to pay 30,000. However, when I look down here where it says set credits, it actually tells me that there's a prepayment into this vendor. So when I click into set credits, then it gives me the opportunity for me to pay this. Now, the challenge with this is that the reference number in this case is wire. So if there was multiple prepayments to that vendor, then I'm going to show you. I'm going to go back to that for a second because I want to show you the effect that has. Let's say I have multiple prepayments to this vendor. So I'm gonna create multiple prepayments to these vendors with different amounts, for example, and I'm gonna show you what the challenge is whenever your customer is dealing with a vendor that maybe they're gonna have multiple prepayments and multiple bills, and they want to apply all these things correctly. So I'm gonna go ahead and create 3 prepayments. I'm gonna just choose different amounts here, and I'm gonna put different bill numbers, or let's say PO numbers, and I'm going to show you what the challenge is here. The challenge is I created 3 prepayments for this vendor, right, using this this check to accounts payable technique. And when I go pay my bill and I select this and I come down here to set credits, the challenge is I'm going to see all 3. The problem is I can't tell which one is for, because the only reference number that I have here is this word wire. So this is a challenge. I can't have QuickBooks show me a memo or something like that, which is a big problem. So a technique that a customer of mine actually taught me, they did this being creative, is what they'll do is they put the PO number as part of the reference number on the actual check. So I'm going to show you what that looks like, and that gives you an idea for how you're going to do this later. So for example, here where it says wire, they put after wire the word, for example, PO 124, and they know this is tied to PO 124. So I'm going to hit save and close, and then I'm going to go into maybe the other one here and put here PO 126, whatever it is. So even though I put as a reference here, it's no good to me. What's useful is to put it up here. So as I do that, when I go now pay my bill, so I'm going to go to vendor, pay bills, and I select my vendor bill and I click on set credits. Now I have a reference point. So that's a very interesting technique. I learned this from a customer of mine, actually. The other interesting point here is that how do I know on bills, I typically don't have the PO number on the bill. I have a bill number. So when I actually get my bill from my customer, I'm going to go back and open up this bill. And I'm trying to go in depth. We're trying to go in depth in this one topic by itself, right? So, so let's say my actual bill number from my customer, from my vendor, sorry, it's some weird number like this, right? 344324. So when I go pay my bill, so I'm gonna go back to pay bills again. I'll go to vendors and pay bills. I see my bill is 423424 when I select it and click on set credits. I only have a PO number as a reference. So the way to solve this problem is when you create a vendor bill, in this case, I'll go back to my vendor bill, it's you put your vendor's invoice number there, but then right after put a space and then put the original PO number, which would have been the same reference point you would have used when you prepaid. So when I do this and I go back to pay my bills, so I go to vendors, pay bills, and I have multiple prepayments towards that vendor, and I'm trying to figure out which one, I can actually match these up. So I can see, oh, that payment for PO 124 is for my vendor bill 124. So then at that point, I know which one I'm going to use to prepay, hit done. And at this point, I can either pay the $15,000 or I can leave it in accounts payable. So if I want to just apply that payment and leave that in accounts payable, I'll put a 0 here and then hit pay selected bills. And that takes care of that particular technique. I'm going to jump into a different technique, which is going to be using vendor credit. This is kind of an interesting one. This is creative. Again, this is stuff that I end up learning from my clients sometimes because they're getting creative. So let's say same sort of scenario. This is a PO for a $25,000 bill for the future, and I want to have that prepayment in there. So another way of doing this is to create a vendor bill, or a vendor credit, sorry, which comes from the bill. So I'm going to go to new transactions, enter bills, and then up here, very slightly hidden in here, there's a little radio button that says bill, and next to it says credit. So I have to change this to credit, and this will actually create something called a vendor bill. A vendor bill credit, sorry. So with this vendor bill credit, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a $10,000 prepayment. And I'll use the same technique here. I'll put here PO 199, whatever PO we're referencing to. But what I have to do here under account, I have to hit my bank account directly. So the way I debit my bank account, the 10,000, and credit my accounts payable or my future accounts payable vendor credit is by hitting my bank account here directly. Now, this is not for the novice. It's very dangerous to be using a bank account in a bill scenario and a bill credit scenario, because it's difficult in context to understand exactly what's going on. But this is this would be a way to hit the bank account for that $10,000 payment and be able to credit my vendor. So I'm going to hit save and close here, and then I'm going to go into my check register real quick to show you what the effect that was for the bank. So here's my payment, as you can see it here. There's my payment, and you see the transaction is a bill payment. So that's the payment coming out of my bank, right? There it is, $10,000, and that's how I know how my banks were affected. Let me just delete this one test I had done here earlier. So there's the 10,000, and this is the one that we're focused in right now. So then when it comes down the time to create the bill, I notice that the prepayment is there showing as a negative accounts payable, which is fine. It's still kind of fine for the time being. When it's time to create the bill, I'm going to go ahead and just create a regular bill. Okay, and then for whatever it is that I'm buying, right? In this case, I'm using inventory asset as an example, which again, I know that could be all kinds of wrong because you're supposed to use a inventory item, but this is just the example I'm putting together. So then this bill is $25,000. I'm going to go ahead and put my vendor's reference number for my bill, but then like I said before, I'm going to put here PO 199 because that will help me apply the credit later. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save and close. And then I'm going to go back to vendors pay bills, and I'm going to have now my two open bills here with the POs next to it. So I'm sure that some of you really appreciate this little PO trick because trust me, when I first saw this, I thought this was genius. So when I click on the little check mark here to select the bill, and then I go down to set credits, same token, I have my PO, my prepayment to my P number as a reference here. I can select it, hit done, and then at that point, maybe I want to pay the rest of the balance with another wire transfer. So I'm going to come down here to assign check number, which another really crazy thing is, why does QuickBooks say assign check number for something that is not just for check? People get confused when they're trying to pay with a wire or something. None of these really actually make sense. This is why QuickBooks should make this word method check. This should say check/bank debit, right? To make the person say, oh yeah, that's checks and bank debits. But so I'm going to click on assign check number, hit pay selected bill, and then I just click wire here, and then I hit it done. And that's how I manage prepayments to future bills using those two techniques. The other technique I'll show you, and this is kind of an awkward one, but it does kind of work, is using this bill payment check technique, and I'll kind of show you how that works. So the first thing I do is I sort of create a tentative bill. So I'm going to go to enter bills, and I'm going to create a bill for, let's say, $12,000. So I'll create a tentative bill for whatever it is that I'm trying to prepay in the future. So this is my tentative bill, $12,000. I don't know my bill number yet because I haven't received it from my vendor. I'll put the original PO number, whatever it happens to be. And then what I'll do is I'm going to go to vendors, pay bills, and then I'm going to select that one bill that's there, and I'm going to make a partial payment to this bill. So let's say this is $6,000, and this will just be a regular check coming out of my bank account. So I'm going to click assign check number, hit pay selected bills, and then whatever my check number is, and then I hit OK. Now, however, this bill shouldn't exist yet. However, there's my bill, and then there's my partial payment. That's why the system still tells me that I owe my vendor $6,000, but in reality, I should have a negative $6,000 there. So once the bill payment is created, so I'm going to show you I have a bill and I have the bill payment. I'm going to go back into that bill and I'll just delete it. This sounds kind of silly, but this is how it works. So once I delete this bill, my bill payment check stays open, which is basically the same thing as a check pointing to accounts payable. Once I double click on it, notice that no bills are checked. Okay, so next time I create a bill, so let's say this is the prepayment. Next time I go ahead and create a bill, and this is kind of an awkward technique, but some people use it, and it could be useful. So once I create my actual bill, whatever the bill happens to be, I'll create my actual bill, and whoops, should be the other way, 12,000, and then whatever my bill number is, and I'll hit save and close. When the actual bill comes in, I'm gonna have the same situation. I'm gonna go to vendors, pay bills. I'll select my supplier, and then I'll have that credit. I'll go to set credits, and then I can select it there. The other thing I like about this particular technique is that you actually don't have to go in the pay bills window because you already done it beforehand. So I'm going to cancel this, and I'll just show you. I can just go into that bill payment that was originally created to pay the bill that I deleted, and I can come in here, and then in here I can use the check mark. Now, it's too bad that I can't create bill payments in QuickBooks without having to go to the pay bill screen, because I would love this check to be kind of the essential example for making prepayments, but this technique only works by going through the pay bills window, because QuickBooks doesn't allow you to create this transaction without it being an actual bill being paid, and then you have to delete the bill. So I hit save and close, and that takes care of that. So that was writing a check with accounts payable. I covered that. The credit memo approach, I covered that, and the bill payment approach. Now I'm going to talk about the prepaid item, which is the last example here. So the prepaid item, this would be the true correct way of doing these things accounting wise. It is a little bit confusing to customers, I think, to our QuickBooks clients, but it is the best way to be accounting friendly with this technique. So the way basically we do this is, we'll make a prepayment, we'll write a check here or something like that. We'll write a check, but then we're going to use an item. And then we're going to create an item. I'm going to go to add new, and then I'm going to create another charge, and I'll call it vendor prepayment. Something like that, right? And then this vendor prepayment item is going to point to an account, which in this case should be an asset. Okay, so I'm gonna create an account called Prepaid Vendor Payments, and I'm gonna make prepaid vendor payments a other current asset. And this is the correct way to manage customer prepayments from an accounting GAAP perspective. So this will be prepaid vendor payments. We'll hit save and close, and then we'll hit OK. And then let's say, for example, this happens to be an $8,000 prepayment. Okay, so I'll put my $8,000 prepayment to vendor payment. I'm using a check. This could also be a wire transfer, whatever the payment is supposed to be. And then I'll hit save and close. And then just for the heck of it, I'm going to choose another vendor, and I'm going to do the exact same technique here because I want to show you how to manage multiple prepayments from vendors. So I'm going to use the same technique here. What's it called? Vendor prepayment, and then this vendor I happen to be prepaying, let's say 4,000, and then I'll put 4,000 here, and then I'll hit save and close. So now I have two vendor prepayments that should be in my balance sheet, and that's really what I want to show you. So I'm going to go into the balance sheet here, into the company financial balance sheet, and then I'm going to show you there's an asset here for prepaid vendor payments. The challenge here is that I don't know who of my vendors this money belongs to. So when I double click on this number, in this particular case it's easy to identify because it's just two, but when you manage a lot of them, what you may want to do is, and I'll go back in my balance sheet, I'm going to double click on that number, and then I'm going to come up here where it says total by, and then I'm going to hit vendor. And what this will do is this will actually create an internal tally of all my prepayments by vendor. And at this point I could memorize this report, and I can call it vendor prepayments or something like that, and I can save that, and I can also add that to my top icon bar, something that's a lot of people don't know it's there. But here on my top icon bar, what I do a lot is when I have reports that are being often used, like a vendor prepayment report, that would be a report that has to be monitored and looked at actually quite often. So what I do is I come into my icon bar and I get rid of all these crap, for the lack of not using a better word, but I'll get rid of all this crap that I don't need here. I leave this empty space, and then whatever report is that I just memorized, I come up here and go to the view menu and I click on add vendor payments to icon bar. So what this will do is it will now add a nice little icon that the customer, for my clients is, some of my clients is too complicated for them to go into reports, memorize reports, vendor prepayments. And something as important as a vendor prepayment report, I think it should be right up here. Because it has to be sort of managed manually. So when they come up here, they see the report and they say, oh, okay, vendor X has $8,000 of credit in their favor. So when it comes down to actually creating the bill, now, so let's say it's time for me to create the bill for vendor X. And one of the real positive things about this is I don't have this weird negative accounts payable that we were seeing with all the other techniques. So this would be the most accounting friendly, but not so user friendly. But then the way this will work is, let's say it's time to create the bill, whatever that bill is. So I'll create the bill here, whatever the item is supposed to be, and let's say this one is, let's say 16,000. But then the key here is that in order to make this bill the actual current accounts payable balance, is I go back here where it says items and I use vendor prepayment. And by doing this, I actually use a negative value of 8,000, and this will work, right? Because with a negative value of 8,000 on one side and a positive value of 16,000 on that side, it would actually render a current bill amount, which is actually what I owe my vendor, of 8,000. Okay, so I'm using the item technique, which is necessary if you're going to include it in a PO. However, some people say, Hector, why would you even go through the item where you can come in here on the expenses tab and use prepaid vendor payments? And actually that's okay as well. I can do that should be no problem. So if you prefer to go straight into the account itself and hit that account, that will work the exact same way. The reason why I showed you with the item is because sometimes people would like to put that in the PO before creating the bill. That way when the bill gets created automatically from that PO, that item comes in, and then you don't have to worry about remembering to put it in there. So that's why I'm showing you both techniques, with the item and without the item. So after that is done, we pull our vendor prepayments report, and we're actually able to see that vendor X is completely settled with their prepayments. All right, that's actually it for me.